begins, as all great movies do, in the flicker of a projector and the whisper of something ancient. The Mummy isn't just a film, it's a portal, one that unearths the adventure spirit that cinema was built on. Before superheroes and multiverses, before billion-dollar franchises, there was a stretch of late 90s wonder when audiences wanted to feel something big again, when popcorn movies had heart, humor, and heat. And no film embodied that better than this pulpy resurrection of an old monster movie myth. You remember the glow, the sweeping deserts, the echo of trumpets, the sand swirling into faces. Brendan Fraser's Rick O'Connell wasn't just an action hero, he was a throwback, a smile in the chaos, a wink at danger. Rachel Weisz's Evelyn was the perfect counterpart. Sharp, bookish, fearless. Together, they turned a horror relic into a romantic adventure classic. But The Mummy wasn't supposed to work. Its production was risky, its tone uncertain. Universal had tried for years to bring the 1932 Boris Karloff film back from the tomb, cycling through horror directors and scripts that felt too cold or too grim. Then came Stephen Sommers, a filmmaker who saw Indiana Jones and Casablanca in the same frame. He envisioned The Mummy not as a terror, but as fun. Shot in Morocco and the Sahara under brutal conditions, plagued by sandstorms and real snakes, the film's survival mirrored its subject, a resurrection against all odds. What emerged in May of 1999 wasn't just a hit. It was a reminder that movies, when made with heart and a bit of danger, could still feel magical. Long before Brendan Fraser cracked a smile beneath the Egyptian sun, The Mummy was already a ghost wandering Hollywood's backlot. The year was 1932, the golden age of Universal monsters, when audiences packed smoky theaters to see the macabre faces of Frankenstein, Dracula, and the Wolfman. Out of that same darkness came The Mummy, a slow, hypnotic horror story starring Boris Karloff as Imhotep, a cursed priest awakened from his eternal slumber. The original film wasn't built on spectacle, but atmosphere. Long shadows, dusty tombs, and an unnerving sense of time collapsing. It was inspired by the 1920s obsession with Egyptology, when Howard Carter's discovery of King Tut's tomb ignited worldwide fascination with curses and ancient secrets. Universal struck gold again, but after sequels and spin-offs through the 40s, the legend faded into B-movie oblivion. For decades, The Mummy lay dormant, sealed in Hollywood's sarcophagus of intellectual properties, a relic waiting for a new reason to rise. By the 1980s and 90s, Universal wanted to reanimate it. The studio envisioned a dark, modern horror film, a new age curse story for the Exorcist generation. Names like Clive Barker and George A. Romero were attached to it at different points, each bringing their own nightmare spin. Scripts piled up, but something felt off. Every version was too grim, too gory, and too soulless. Then came Stephen Sommers, a director with a different compass. He grew up on Raiders of the Lost Ark and classic adventure serials, films where danger was thrilling, not hopeless. In 1997, Sommers pitched an idea to Universal that sounded unorthodox. What if The Mummy wasn't a horror movie at all? What if it was an old-fashioned adventure with heart? The studio hesitated, then said yes. And just like that, a monster was reborn. When Stephen Sommers got the green light, few at Universal realized they just approved one of the boldest genre shifts of the decade. With an $80 million budget, modest by today's standards, but massive for 1998, The Mummy would blend adventure, romance, and supernatural spectacle in a way few films dared. Sommers called it a romantic action adventure that just happens to have a mummy in it. The tone had to be perfect. Too serious, and it would sink like a relic under sand. Too goofy, and it would lose its ancient mystique. Casting became the first great test. Universal wanted a leading man who could channel the swagger of Indiana Jones, but the warmth of Errol Flynn. Someone audiences could root for, even when the sand hit the fan. Brendan Fraser, then known for George of the Jungle, wasn't the obvious choice. But Sommers saw something that the others didn't: sincerity. Fraser had the rare mix of physical presence and genuine charm, a hero who could throw a punch and deliver a joke all in the same breath. For Evelyn Carnahan, the brilliant yet clumsy Egyptologist, Sommers cast a then up-and-coming British actress, Rachel Weisz. Her wit and intelligence lit up every screen test. She wasn't a damsel, she was the compass of the story. Filming began in the summer of 1998 across Morocco and the Sahara. Temperatures soared past 120 degrees. Crew members suffered from dehydration. Sandstorms halted filming, and venomous snakes slithered into tents. Fraser and the stunt team endured it all, often performing dangerous sequences themselves. Yet, through all that chaos, something clicked. The cast bonded, the tone balanced, the desert became a character of its own, vast, merciless, but beautiful. And somewhere under that relentless sun, a legend was beginning to rise. On set, The Mummy became something more than a studio revival. It turned into a family forged by heat, exhaustion, and pure adventure. Brendan Fraser's Rick O'Connell wasn't written as a superhero. He was human, reckless, romantic. But it was Fraser's natural energy that turned him into something iconic. He brought a sincerity to action that Hollywood rarely saw anymore. Brendan never faked anything, Stephen Sommers later said. If he could do the stunt, he did. That authenticity nearly cost him his life. During the hanging scene early in the film, Fraser actually lost consciousness when the noose tightened too much. The medical crew rushed in as he hit the floor. He woke up minutes later, shaken but unhurt, and then he went right back to work. Rachel Weisz's Evelyn, meanwhile, wasn't just a comic relief or love interest. She was the intellect and heart of the movie. Weisz built her character around contradictions, confident yet clumsy, brave yet terrified. Her chemistry with Fraser was instant, built not on scripted romance, but the natural rhythm of two actors having fun with danger. That chemistry radiated through the film's defining moments. Evelyn reading the Book of the Dead, the kiss in the burning city, the sandstorm roaring across the desert. Behind the camera, industrial light and magic worked overtime to make the impossible believable. Imhotep's resurrection, the locust swarms, and that now famous sand face devouring the horizon. Sommers described The Mummy as a roller coaster that never stopped moving. But what gave it its soul wasn't the spectacle, it was the heartbeat behind it. Somewhere between the humor, the horror, and the heat, The Mummy found its pulse. And by the time the camera stopped rolling, everyone knew this wasn't just another monster movie. It was lightning in a bottle. When The Mummy hit theaters on May 7th, 1999, expectations were modest. The summer was already stacked. The Phantom Menace loomed on the horizon, and most believed Stephen Sommers' desert adventure would be buried under a wave of sci-fi hype. But by the end of the opening weekend, Universal knew something miraculous had happened. Audiences loved it. The film opened to $43 million, staggering for the time, and word of mouth turned it into a global phenomenon. Families, teens, and even critics found themselves swept up in the magic. Reviewers called it the best kind of old-fashioned entertainment, praising its blend of action, humor, and heart. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was connection. The Mummy gave people something they didn't know they were missing. A movie that made them feel like kids again. A film you could laugh at, gasp through, and quote for years. Fraser's charm and Weiss's wit became instant icons. Arnold Vosloo's Imhotep, terrifying yet tragic, joined the pantheon of movie monsters. The box office buried the skeptics. The Mummy went on to earn over $415 million worldwide, turning Fraser into a leading man and Sommers into a studio favorite. It spawned toys, Halloween costumes, and endless rewatch value. Kids who watched it on VHS wore the tape thin. Adults rediscovered the thrill of pure adventure. For Universal, it was more than a hit. It was a resurrection. The same studio that built its legacy on monsters had just reinvented one. In an era obsessed with irony, The Mummy dared to be sincere, and audiences rewarded that sincerity with something rare, genuine love. The late 90s were a crossroads for Hollywood, the old world of practical adventure colliding with the dawn of digital filmmaking. The Mummy stood right in the middle of that sandstorm, balancing real stunts and cutting-edge effects in a way that felt almost miraculous. Industrial light and magic, fresh off Jurassic Park and Twister, was brought in to create the impossible. The studio's team, led by visual effects supervisor John Burton, faced an enormous challenge, bringing a photorealistic undead priest to life. Imhotep's transformation from desiccated corpse to regenerated being required over 75 different stages of animation. Early CGI was notoriously temperamental, but ILM blended motion capture, digital skeleton mapping, and live-action layering in ways no one had ever seen before. Arnold Vosloo, who played Imhotep, spent much of his performance acting against blue screens or empty space. His eyes and expressions were carefully scanned to synchronize with digital composites, primitive by today's standards, but revolutionary at the time. Sommers described it as painting with light and dust. Yet for all the technology, The Mummy never lost its human core. Unlike other effects-heavy films of the era, The spectacle served as a story, not the other way around. When the sandstorm swallows the plane, or when thousands of scarabs erupt from the walls, it isn't about CGI showing off, it's about awe. That balance, practical chaos meets digital wonder, changed everything. Studios suddenly saw how adventure cinema could evolve without losing its soul. You could mix pulp storytelling with modern tools and still make it feel real. And from that moment, Hollywood began chasing the formula Sommers had stumbled upon: thrills, laughs, and digital spectacle, all wrapped with the most important ingredient: heart. When lightning strikes in Hollywood, the instinct is to bottle it. And in 2001, Universal tried. The Mummy Returns arrived 2 years later, bigger, louder, and digitally heavier. The story brought back Rick and Evelyn, now married with a son, and introduced The Rock in his first film role as the Scorpion King. The sequel opened to even larger box office numbers, earning nearly $500 million worldwide. The magic was still there, but so were the cracks. The film's heart, the thing that made the first one sing, started to get buried beneath layers of spectacle. The infamous Scorpion King CGI, now a legendary meme of early 2000s effects, symbolized the shift. Technology had advanced, but the intimacy had faded. The sandstorm was now a tidal wave. Still, audiences love revisiting those characters. Fraser and Weisz carried the weight with chemistry that still felt alive. Behind the scenes, the production was intense. Sets were larger, shooting schedules were longer, and the tone leaned further toward action than wonder. Weisz later admitted that the physical demands were exhausting, but she loved how Evelyn had evolved into a more confident adventurer. Then came the Scorpion King spin-off, a prequel that helped launch Dwayne Johnson's film career, followed by The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor in 2008, an ambitious but uneven entry that replaced Weisz and relocated the story to China. It had scope, but no soul. By then, the sands had shifted. Audiences had moved on to superheroes and sequels of another kind. The Mummy franchise, once reborn in brilliance, began to fade back into myth, a reminder of how even cinematic magic can be stretched too thin. Time has a way of softening memories, but not The Mummy. Somehow, a film that could have been forgotten among late 90s blockbusters had only grown more beloved. Ask anyone who saw it in theaters or on VHS, and you'll see their eyes light up. There's nostalgia, sure, but also admiration. The Mummy wasn't just a hit, it was a new benchmark. Stephen Sommers' adventure reminded Hollywood that optimism and awe could coexist with danger and darkness. Long before shared universes and reboots became the studio obsession, The Mummy proved that audiences would rally behind characters, not just spectacle. It was old school storytelling, dressed in digital clothes, and that balance shaped the DNA of films that followed. Pirates of the Caribbean, National Treasure, even Guardians of the Galaxy trace a little of their DNA back to O'Connell's smirk in the desert. For Brendan Fraser, it became the defining role of his career, the one fans still quote, cosplay, and celebrate decades later. His effortless blend of heroism and humility turned Rick O'Connell into a generational archetype, a man with dust in his hair and heart in his smile. Rachel Weisz's Evelyn redefined the adventure heroine, book-smart, brave, and beautifully human. And Arnold Vosloo's Emotep, with his tragic love story, made a monster sympathetic. Behind the scenes, The Mummy marked a turning point for visual effects. ILM's work paved the way for the digital realism that dominated 2000 cinema. Yet, despite the technology, the movie remains timeless because it feels alive. Even Universal's ill-fated 2017 reboot, despite its ambition, proved something. You can remake the story, but you can't recreate the soul. That's what keeps the 1999 film immortal. Not the curse, but the craft. There's a reason The Mummy still feels eternal. It's more than nostalgia. It's a memory of what blockbuster filmmaking once dared to be: adventurous, romantic, and handcrafted. It's a relic from an era when studios took risks on sincerity, when actors did their own stunts, not for realism, but for the love of the craft, and when visual effects served wonder rather than replaced it. Rewatch it today, and it still breathes. The desert glows like gold dust on film. The music by Jerry Goldsmith swells like an ancient hymn. Every moment, from Rick's crooked grin to Evelyn's breathless courage, feels alive. You can feel the wind, the heat, the danger. You believe in the impossible because everyone on the set believed in it first. Behind the lens, Stephen Sommers' crew fought through brutal conditions and relentless odds to capture the kind of magic that can't be coded into pixels. The sandstorms were real. The laughter between takes was real. The exhaustion, the camaraderie, the heart, all real. What they created wasn't just an adventure movie, it was a time capsule for joy. 2 decades later, its influence is everywhere in theme parks, fan art, memes, and the underlying affection of a generation that grew up quoting, "I am a librarian." But beyond all the nostalgia, The Mummy stands as proof that heart can outlast hype, that even in a world full of endless reboots, something made with honesty will always endure. Because sometimes, cinema doesn't need to be reinvented. Sometimes it just needs to remember what it once was, a little dangerous, a little funny, and completely full of wonder. And that's the real treasure The Mummy left behind.